As the Society of Ley Hunters Moot in May will be in the town of Todmorden at the top of the Pennines on the Yorkshire-Lancashire border, and knowing of the famous UFO near landing there in 1989, I decided to look into whether there are any associated Leys in the area. I also knew that the encounter occurred in November, 1 month before the even more famous sightings at Rendlesham in Suffolk, with which there seem to be some similarities, including time anomalies. I first came across a television programme from the 1990s in the Strange But True series presented by Michael Aspel, which is now on YouTube. This gave a full account of PC Alan Godfrey's encounter and others about the same time in the town, and allowed me to pinpoint the position in Burnley Road where the object was seen. It also revealed, surprisingly, that UFO sightings in the town, at the time of the programme anyway, formed 1/10 of the sightings over Britain. Investigation into Jenny Randles' research in her books Time Travel and Supernatural Pennines indicated that the town and its valley have earned the name of UFO Alley locally. Many of the UFOs are of the ball of light type, which are probably plasma effects caused by the area being geologically energetic, with quartz-bearing rocks and fault lines. But these also seem to display intelligence of a kind in their motion and possibly taking on a form understandable to the witness. An example of this is the case at Roslin Castle near Edinburgh, in another energetic area. A ball of light was seen to apparently morph into a black dog, a significant legend of the castle. Time anomalies of various kinds often occur at such places. While checking reports of cattle wandering across a local council estate in Todmorden on the 28th of November 1980, PC Alan Godfrey saw a bright light hovering above the road ahead that he described as a rotating diamond-shaped object about 20 feet high and 14 feet wide. Leaves were swirling under the object. He tried to radio for help, but the equipment would not work. He was at the junction of Burnley Road and Leys Road, the council estate. Then the object suddenly vanished, and he found himself further down the road. He experienced missing time of approximately 25 minutes. The cows were found on the rugby pitch on the adjoining park, but it was locked, and although it had been raining and it was very muddy, there were no hoof prints indicating how they had got in. It seems that Alan Godfrey and the cows were teleported, as well as being thrown forward in time, and there are many such experiences. There must have been something special about this stretch of Burnley Road leading out of Todmorden, because there was another very similar encounter there earlier in the same year, but in the opposite direction. This was reported by Jenny Randles in Supernatural Pennines. It happened on the early hours of January the 14th, 1980. Bill, a truck driver, had a delivery to Hollingworth near Oldham and drove the route from Burnley through Heald Moor towards Todmorden. He was close to the county border, still just in Lancashire, just before the village of Portsmouth. At this point the road cuts through a cliff edge on one side and slopes to a railway line through the Calder Valley on the other. There is a lay-by on the road here. As he drove towards it, Bill heard a loud hum like an electricity generator, and saw an object in the lay-by like a tortoise shell, with 3 beams of misty red light emerging from the side. Next to it were 2 beings, one of whom was bending over. Thinking at first these were workmen gritting the road, he slowed to a crawl. Moving past the object, the total strangeness became apparent. The light rays were fuzzy and laser-like. The bracken on the cliff edge glowed curiously. The colour of the rays varied in a strange way, depending on which angle he looked at them. Of the men, one seemed to be wearing a uniform and the other a silver one-piece suit. As if drugged or hypnotised, his mind started to fog over. As he inched past the spot, time stretched out like elastic. He said it took minutes. As he drifted past, the truck suddenly drained of all power and the headlights cut out. But the engine, diesel-powered, continued to operate. The very next thing Bill recalled was a sudden jolt, and regaining consciousness, still feeling fuzzy-headed, at an unknown spot somewhere on the edge of Todmorden, very close to where the Godfrey incident was to occur. The truck was stopped, the lights were back on and the engine was still running, but there was absolutely no sense of discontinuity in time and space. Continuing to Hollingsworth in broad daylight, he arrived at 9:10 a.m. He had lost about 2 hours during the moments he crawled past the lay-by. There is another case described in Supernatural Pennines with very similar features, but in which there were 2 jolts and teleportation to 2 different places. This happened at Leys in Staffordshire, near the Bridestones burial chamber, where Gary Biltcliffe described another time anomaly case in the Time Anomalies on the Spine of Albion video. In January 1974, Jeff, a student teacher, and his fiancée Jane were driving near Leys at around 9:30 p.m. when a green mass appeared in the sky. It followed them for a short distance before heading south towards Cheddleton. Even though it had disappeared, the young couple felt a strange sense of presence, as if they were being watched. They stopped and got out of the car and stood in the middle of the road staring at the sky. Directly overhead was a huge dark mass, and from this silent monster came 2 beams of light. A green one lit up the road, and another, blue, illuminated the car. Then they slowly moved together, forming one big circle that swallowed up the car. The terrified couple leapt into the vehicle, the engine was still running, and on impulse shot off over the moors in the direction the beams were now headed. Moments later, so it seemed, there was a bump, and they came to as if waking from a hypnotic trance. The bump turned out to be a cattle grid at Ilam, a village on the edge of Dovedale. Moments later there was another jolt, and with no break in the flow of time, they were now mysteriously in suburban streets. They found a police station and discovered it was Macclesfield, 25 miles away. What was worse, it was 3:30 a.m. 6 hours had somehow just disappeared. The police had to send a patrol car to the homes of their distressed families to try to explain what had just happened to their son and daughter. The Strange But True programme also mentioned that the school caretaker, Leonard Smith, had seen a UFO the same night as Alan Godfrey's encounter. Checking the grounds, he looked up and saw a UFO approximately where he later learned PC Godfrey had had his sighting. The object shot across the valley 4 times, backwards and forwards, and then vanished over the hills. When aligning the point where PC Godfrey had seen the object with the school, the line points directly to Pendle Hill in Lancashire. Well known for the tragic witch trials in the 17th century, it's also had many light ball sightings. It was also the site of 2 similar sightings of cigar-shaped objects in a misty cloud reported in Supernatural Pennines. The first was in the early hours of 24th of August 1914, when 2 police officers guarding a railway property in Clitheroe at 2:50 a.m. saw a light over Pendle Hill, an airship the shape of a sausage, and the light came from a platform beneath it. There appeared to be white clouds about it, which in his opinion was smoke. Zeppelins were feared at the time as the First World War was about to erupt. The other was seen on the night of the 9th of March 1977 at 3:10 a.m. from Nelson, the other side of the hill. 2 men saw a dark cigar with a central mass of swirling colours, blending together like a melting pot of neon fire. The alignment of the two sightings in Todmorden with Pendle Hill is a good lay, and proceeding from those 2 points, it goes to an ancient cross on Stansfield Moor. The megalithic portal says it's an ancient cross called Mount Cross or Idol Cross, standing at the southern edge of Stansfield Moor, near Kebbs Road, Stipperden, some 2 miles north of Cornholm village. It's said by local historians to date from the 7th century, but it's more likely to be from the 10th or 11th century. The cross is a registered ancient monument. It stands between 4 and 5 feet high, with a wheel head 65 centimetres by 38 centimetres in diameter. It's a free-standing cross without a base. There are traces of roll moulding decoration, vine scrolls and an incised Calvary cross. Some historians have referred to it as the Rood Stone, which was said to have been discovered buried beneath the great bride stones to the southeast of this site. According to legend, it was long ago the site of pagan practices. This, perhaps, is where the name Rood Stone comes from. The great bride stones themselves were once associated with pre-Christian pagan practices. Mount Cross or Idol Cross is said to be the oldest religious memorial in the Todmorden area. The line then goes to Bank Top Farm, a point on the long causeway where the Lancashire-Yorkshire border crosses. This is a lay centre, a crossing point of several lays. And this is a track leading to it. We can't travel along it as Google Maps have not scanned it, but it's probably the slight rise between the 2 hills on the horizon. The next point is St Luke the Evangelist Church, Briarfield, a 19th century building, but probably subconsciously sited. And from here the lay goes on to Pendle Hill summit. Then it goes to another beacon hill near Grindleton Fell. Here we are looking back along the lay from that hill towards Pendle. Finally it reaches the Little Bull Stones, a gritstone outcrop on the hillside above Crowsdale in the Forest of Bowland. The Strange But True programme reported that there was another sighting in the area at the Deer Play Inn, thought to date from the 18th century, but now vacant. On the moors above Todmorden, next to what's said to be the highest bus stop in Britain, is the Deer Play Inn. One night in 1989, the landlady awoke to see an amazing sight. Well, I never took UFOs seriously at all, but one night my husband came into the bedroom when I was asleep and said, "Come on, look at this." I came into the lounge and I saw this light right behind that cottage there. It went right across the moor, going about 50 miles an hour. It lit the car park up like it was daylight. I can't believe it. My husband said, "Well, explain that," and I can't explain it. Another sighting occurred in December 1982 at the same place. Reported in Supernatural Pennines. The witnesses were the Lowe family and were driving home from Burnley towards Bacup on the road towards over Deerplay Moor. Near the village of Weir they observed a strange white glow coming from the south. Pulling to a halt, they got out of the car and watched for 8 minutes as the thing crossed directly overhead, slowly and silently at an altitude of just 500 feet. It clearly did so in what the Lowes called a zigzag. It wobbled from side to side like a falling leaf. At close proximity, they had a good view of it, as 2 white curved sides encasing a rugby ball shape, with a red glowing strip at each end. As it moved away northwestward, 2 bright white lights appeared from the south and passed above it, streaking away like jet aircraft, but again with no sound, almost as if they were flying over and inspecting the big object. There is a lay coming from Todmorden to the Deer Play Inn, going northwestward, and the UFO in the second account seems to have been following it. At the place where the sighting could have happened, there seems to be something which looks like a tumulus. But if it is, it's not marked on the map. But it would be on the lay. It comes from the site of Shade Wesleyan Chapel, which was unfortunately demolished in 2020. The Demolition Register reports, "Sadly, this building resides on top of a culverted river, which during a storm in February partially collapsed. The threat of further collapse and flood hazard this would create has necessitated the demolition of the church. The building was very tastefully converted into residential use, and was a paragon of heritage renewal, which makes this even more of a pity." The line next goes to the standing stones at the hamlet of Stones, which seem to have been an amazing case of subconscious sighting in the 19th century. John Billingsley reports in Folk Tales from Calderdale. There are 3 standing stones at the hamlet of Stones near Todmorden, West Yorkshire, but in this case they seem to be reasonably modern in date. This off-the-beaten-track hamlet with the name Stones is a curious one. It seems to be in another time or realm of its own, but an idyllic one. It lies just southwest of the imposing Victorian edifice Dobroyd Castle, once home to the industrious Fielden family of Todmorden. At least one of the standing stones was erected in the early 19th century, while the other 2 were put up around the same time, or a bit later. And there is a 4th stone, but this is recumbent and now lies in front of a well. The tallest of the 3 standing stones, known as number 1, is said to be 12 feet high, and can be found in a farmer's field beside Stones Lane, and just to the west of Stones Farm. It's a hefty pillar of grey-black millstone grit from a local quarry that was obviously long exposed to the industrial chimney smoke of Todmorden in days gone by. We don't really know when the gigantic stone was set up, and whether this is its original position, though it looks well supported at its base by a number of sturdy stones. It may have been erected after the Battle of Waterloo in 1812, rather like the other standing stone over to the north of the hillock called Centre Hill. Or maybe this stone was placed here following another, perhaps more recent battles like those of the Great War 1914-18. This seems more likely, as there is evidence saying that it was placed here in 1921. But other than that, we may never really know with any certainty. It's the 4th tallest standing stone in Yorkshire. The slightly shorter and thinner standing stone, known as number 2, stands atop a grassy hillock called Centre Hill, which is partly surrounded by a wooded area at the south side, and just below that a private residence called Model Farm. It's located some 95 metres northeast of and more or less in the same field as stone number 1, although there is a low wall between this and a little hillock. This particular stone is held in place through the central hole of a large millstone, which is in turn supported below that on some other flat stones arranged in an equally circular fashion. We do know, however, with some sort of certainty that this stone was brought to its present position after 1812 and erected to commemorate the Battle of Waterloo. Centre Hill was originally the site of a beacon, according to author Paul Bennett, the Northern Antiquarian. It looks as if this standing stone has at some point been used as a gatepost. Standing stone number 3 is located at the east side of a farmer's field, some 330 metres to the northwest, along Stones Lane. It stands at just 4.5 feet high, and is a thin pillar compared to the other 2 stones, but it's quite a nice little standing stone. We don't know when this stone was placed here, though it looks as if it might have been here for a much longer period of time. A little to the south of this stone, close to the wall, there is a well that has a good constant supply of fairly clear water that comes down from the low hillside above. At the front of the well there is a 5-foot long, flat, recumbent stone. This is considered to be the former standing stone number 4. The spring apparently began to flow or re-emerge when the stone was being dug up, according to Paul Bennett, the Northern antiquarian. However, this well is not marked on recent OS maps, nor are any of the standing stones. The Ley then goes on to the Deer Play Inn, following about a mile of nearly coincident road there, and then on to a crossroads at Langho, north of Blackburn. One of its roads is coincident with the Ley for a short distance. But next it comes to Salisbury Hall, adjacent to the Roman road leading into Ribchester. Salisbury is first recorded as a chapelry in the ancient parish of Blackburn. Initially there was no church in Salisbury, so devout landowners of the village often had private chapels. It's known that Salisbury Old Hall housed a chapel. The most ancient part of Salisbury Hall was originally a chapel, and by the 1900s it was being used for stabling and other accommodation connected with the farm that operated from the hall. The builders of the original Salisbury Hall made use of stone that was found at the old Roman fort at Ribchester. All traces of the original Old Hall were pulled down in 1883, and a large mansion built on its site as the new Salisbury Hall, and the estate continued as a large farm. Finally the Ley reaches the written stone at Grimsarg near Longridge. It's a very curious and mysterious stone slab with an even stranger inscribed message carved into it, and the name Ralph Radcliffe, 1655, although this very large lump of gritstone might be much older. This inscribed stone, known locally as the Written Stone, stands at the side of the lane close by the entrance to Written Stone Farm, originally called Cottam House. It became known as the Cursed Stone after very strange and ghostly happenings took place when the farmer decided to try and move it, but he had to return the stone to its original position when all hell let loose, according to the legend. There is a long inscription along the side of the stone in large letters dating back to the mid-17th century. The message reads, "Rav Radcliffe laid this stone to lie forever, AD 1655. It is, according to the legend, said that a terrible murder was committed here. The victim of this murder began to plague the conspirators and the Radcliffe family who lived at Cottam House. Several members of Ralph Radcliffe's family began to die in strange circumstances, as if they were cursed in some way. In the hope of atoning for this terrible murder, Mr. Radcliffe had a large stone carved and an inscription written onto it, the hope being perhaps that the restless spirit would be calmed. But travellers going along the lane, which local people called Boggart Lane, began to report strange happenings. Loud screeching sounds, bumps and bangs, ghostly apparitions, people being pinched and their clothing being messed about with. All this was simply put down to a poltergeist trying to cause trouble. Janet and Colin Board in 1980 tell about a doctor riding his horse along Written Stone Lane. Late one night he was riding past the Written Stone when his horse became hysterical and took off at a gallop, only stopping 2 miles further on. The doctor must have been feeling especially bold, for despite all this adventure he decided to return to the Written Stone and face whatever had frightened the horse. He rode up to the stone and issued a challenge, whereupon, in the words of Kathleen Eyre, describing the encounter in her Lancashire Legends, a shapeless mass materialised, seized him, plucked him from the saddle and almost squeezed the breath from his body. As soon as he was able, the doctor left the spot at a gallop. There is another lay through Todmorden, which comes through the Studley Pike monument above the town, and aligns with a long stretch of the Long Causeway to the northwest. It's also one of the lays passing through the Banktop Farm lay centre. Studley Pike is a 1,300-foot hill which is noted for the 121-foot Studley Pike monument at its summit, which dominates the moors of the upper Calder Valley. The monument replaced an earlier structure which started in 1814 and commemorating the defeat of Napoleon. It was completed in 1815 after the Battle of Waterloo, but collapsed in 1854 after an earlier lightning strike and decades of weathering. Its replacement was therefore built slightly further from the edge of the hill. There is evidence to suggest that some sort of structure existed on the site even before the earlier structure was built. The Ley then runs along the Bridestones, outcrops of millstone grit rocks and boulders which are half a mile long. There are a number of myths and legends associated with them. There is even a rock house at Fast Ends above Bridestones farm. Just above this there are some large flat rocks which look to have ancient cut marks. Author Paul Bennett, in his work The Old Stones of Elmet, says of the Bridestones that it is a beautiful, remarkable and powerful site of obvious veneration. First described in local deeds as early as 1491, there are a great number of severely weathered boulders all around. It may have been dedicated to Bride, goddess of the Brigantine people. The goddess's divine qualities were those of healing, smithcraft, poetry and motherhood. Tradition of folklore tell of them as a place of pagan worship. Next it comes to the nearby Hawkstones, another millstone grit outcrop of strangely shaped stones, which also seem to have cut marks. The next point is a crossroads at Stansfield Moor. It then goes on to the Banktop Farm Ley Centre, then runs along the long causeway to a trigger point peak at 329 feet. Going through Burnley, it passes through two 19th century churches. This one is Holy Trinity, now redundant. Then on to All Saints with John the Baptist. It then goes to Gawthorpe Hall, originally a Peely tower, a strong fortification built by the Shuttleworths in the 14th century as a defence against invading Scots. Then to a multi-junction of tracks at Wiswell Moor and across tracks in the Forest of Bowland. There is another Ley in the area which could have UFO connections. It starts at Christchurch Bacup, another redundant 19th century church. Supernatural Pennines describes Bacup as a town at the east end of the Rossendale Valley and one of the biggest UFO sighting hotspots in the UK, especially focused on quarries and in surrounding villages such as Stacksteads and Weir and moors east of Todmorden. The book mentions several events in or near the town. One was the appearance of an anomalous big cat, seemingly a mountain lion, in the moors above Waterfoot and Bacup. There was a UFO flap there at the same time. There was another series of events at Stacksteads in the steep valley between Rawtenstall and Bacup. Someone living there had a sudden memories which seemed to be time anomalies. A certain sight or smell would trigger a flood of images which would almost transport her to that scene from a long ago age. It then crosses the Lancashire-Yorkshire border at Portsmouth, after running closely parallel with the border across Carr and Craggs Moor. This is near where the truck driver Bill had his strange experience. Continuing on, it goes to the Banktop Farm Ley Centre, and then through Coal Clough Farm. In February 1995, a dark egg shape hovered low over the wind farm that has been set into the moors on the north side of the Calder Valley at Coal Clough. This, between Todmorden and Burnley, is on the moors where there have been over a dozen reported cases of alien contact, time lapses and abductions. The line then runs to a cross-tracks at Racetrick Grieve and onto the Alcomden Stones on Stanbury Moor. The Northern Antiquarian says Although local tradition gave these great rocks a prehistoric pedigree, the archaeological record doesn't say much. The main feature amidst this extensive scattering is the large rocking stone, said to weigh 6 or 7 tons, resting upon other glacial deposits. The rock itself can be made to rock very slightly.